My father's death. It was so much chaoticness around it, and it separated me and my mom. The biggest reason being she was greedy for a bigger portion of his will. Before his death, my father, a businessman, had many assets, including houses, two multi-million companies. But my mother, on the other hand, is a trader, and of course, good at what she does. I get intrigued anytime I remember how my dad met my mother, especially because of the swiftness and nurturing their love for each other. Here's a quick narration of how they met. One day, my father was passing by her shop and branched in to buy something. Immediately, my father saw my mother. I guess you could call it love at first sight. And since then, he'd always pass by her shop, greet her, and just crack a few jokes. As expected in most cases, my mother started to catch feelings for him as well before my father finally decided to collect her phone number. An action my mother never hesitated. That was the starting point of their knitted friendship. They went on dates, and my mother would visit my father during the weekends. 4 months later, my father asked my mother out, and they eventually got married. They love themselves and will always call each other at any slightest distance. A year after their wedding, they gave birth to me and me alone. In other words, I was my parents' only child, and when I turned 16 years of age, my father decided to prepare a formal document to will his properties. My mother and I, without informing us. One fateful day, my mother suddenly developed an interest in my father's will. She starts bugging him to show her his will, but my father, because of reasons best known to him, disagreed and never gave in, claiming it was for the best it stays the way it is. Still, Mom, for the kind of person she is, never gave up and started acting up in the house. But Dad was a man of his word and would not allow himself to be influenced into his going back on his words. The pressure from Mother grew worse when hatred stepped in. My mother would not cook for him any food at any time and when I wasn't around. When I was very young then, Mom still showed her care for me, but would always use adult wiles to get me to tell her anything Dad told me. Anytime I told her I needed anything, she'd always provide it for me and never allowed me to suffer or feel intimidated as a boy. For a fact, I did enjoy that motherly love and care to the point I'd always tell her how lucky I am. And I felt that I have her as my mother and that if I could come back to this world, I'd be glad to have her as my mother again. How naive I was to not know that a volcano fight erupted between Mom and Dad, and the fact that she would always act cool whenever I was around didn't really help much. It didn't take long before my father began to conclude that my mom probably agreed to marry him because of his stuff. Suddenly, my father started acting strange towards Mom, and well, everyone in the house to be honest, ushering in an atmosphere of tyranny. Many years after I came back from college for semester break, I was alone in the house together with my father, and he said to me that he wanted to discuss something important, only for him to start telling me about my mother's infidelity, greed, and how he wants for me to smart up so I can join him in managing his business, which would later become mine, obviously. I didn't believe him because I knew my dad's high standards and I was too far from measuring up. When my mother came back home, I went straight to her room and told her everything my father said about her, but I left out the part that said he wanted me to take over his business after him. Afterward, I pleaded with her to not let my father know I told her anything, but to my greatest surprise, she flared up, went straight to my father's room and started cursing at him for trying to drive a wedge between her and me. She told him that if he denied her access to his will, he should at least stay away from me and not create problems between us. She emphasized the will that I got curious about it since it was my first time hearing about the will. My dad kept quiet, didn't say a word, and this got Mom more riled up because she hated someone giving her the silence treatment. But it got to the point my father could not control himself again. And he started talking and said to her that she had no right whatsoever to confront him because, well, it's been a while since she performed her responsibility to him as a wife, and that she doesn't cook regularly for him again. I was shocked to hear that because my mother had always acted like a good wife in my presence. Upon hearing that, she went back angrily inside her room, and since then she'd been sleeping in a separate room in the house. I was honestly just so embarrassed because I confided in my mother not to let my father know that I came to tell her anything. I was also surprised at my mother's pretense all this while, and this made me stop talking to her for some days. The moment she left his presence, I went straight to my father to apologize, and also with the intention of knowing more about the will. I prostrated before him and told him to forgive me for telling my mother what he told me. I explained to him that I was so surprised to hear what she said about my mother because I had no clue what was happening between them. Well, my father understood my innocence and enlightened me about my mother's attitude on the subject of the will. I used that opportunity to get more information about the will and if it related to his recent discussion with me about learning to manage his business. Due to what happened between my father and mother that day, a remarkable distance began to creep into my casual relationship with my mom. I'd already lost trust I had in her, and I was not closer to her unlike before, and it was obvious that our relationship was falling headlong to the ground. On the other hand, Mother tried as much as possible to bring me closer back to her, but the bond, it simply wasn't there. So, I became more bonded to my father and would always go to his room anytime he was around, and this did get my mother restless, making her start acting strange towards me. This went on for about 3 months, and one Monday morning, my mother started with her troubles again. She rallied words on my father and me, noting that we were pushing ourselves to our early graves. We never took her seriously because we'd gotten used to her weightless banter. Later that day, my father fell sick and could not do anything throughout the day. So very early the following day, I went straight to his room to greet him and ask him about his health, only for me to get there and find my father still sleeping. I moved closer to him and tapped him, but there was no response. I was literally shivering when I said his name. He didn't respond. Then I started shouting and it woke up my mother, and she rushed straight to his room as well. She shouted his name several times, but to no avail, and it turned out, well, my father was gone. Dead. Since then, I wasn't been myself because I've never expected anything like that could happen sometime this soon. This made me dislike my mother the more I thought about it because I thought within myself that if she didn't leave him alone in the room and did not give her the troubles, my father might not have died an untimely death. Throughout the first week of my father's death, my mother leveraged that opportunity to get my attention back to her. She told me that she knew how much pain I was in because of his death and how much I would miss him because she knew how much I love him. Considering my affection to him at least, and she encouraged me to take heart and that she'll act like a father and a mother to me and make sure I didn't feel my father's absence. I believed her and decided to draw closer to her again, as I had no choice because she was the only one left for me now, even though I still had a slight hatred for her whenever I just remembered my dad's death. After a week, I discovered that my mother had stopped going to her shop and started going to my father's office. I remembered what my father told me before his death, so I told my mother to allow me to go to his office, but mother refused bluntly and said that I should just concentrate on my academics as I was preparing for my sophomore exams. I blindly agreed to everything my mother said because I was still 19 years old and believed she knew better. I had the mind of becoming a businessman just like Dad. Studied hard for my exam and was so happy because I came out with flying colors. After I passed the exam, I raised it with my mother again to allow me to go to my father's office, because I always remembered the last words he said to me before his death. And well, anytime I remember that, I'd feel disappointed for my father for not doing what he said he'd do before he died. But anytime I raised the issue with mother, she would always get annoyed and cautioned me never to raise that issue with her again, explicitly telling me that she would let me know the right time I could go to the office. She only wanted me to go to another country to further my academics more, but I just blatantly refused. Because of that, she'd always give me attitude and scold me for not listening to her, call me all sorts of names, and sometimes even refuse to give me allowance for my upkeep. Hard feelings aside, my father's death actually got me asking if Mom was still the same woman I knew while I was still a child. My mother took sole control of my dad's companies, obviously not because she thought I was still very young to assume charge, but because she locked me out of any single way to participate in the affairs, at the very least. On a Saturday morning after I turned 18, my father's lawyer, Barrister Andrew, came to our house, introduced himself as Pop's lawyer, and said he'd come to read my dad's will. To my greatest surprise and my mother's, the lawyer said my father willed all his property to me, left nothing to Mom. Suddenly, my mother stood up and shouted that it's not possible. The barrister explained to my mother that the initial will featured her, but one faithful day my father called him to modify it and gave everything to me. He said he tried to convince him and asked him why he would make such a drastic move, but Dad told him it's a personal decision, that he should just do as instructed, and he was left with no choice but to do his bidding. When I further investigated the day Dad made the change in his will, I discovered it was the same day my mother shouted at him in my presence and left his room for another room. So Andrew gave me documents to sign as the new owner of all Dad's assets, as it was stated in my father's will. Still, my mother refused and said that I could never have access to the company she's now in charge of, claiming that I lack what it takes to manage it since I've not even vassed with how things are run. She otherwise proposed that I be only given access to the houses, but not the two companies. I was annoyed and angrily told her that even if I did not have any experience running the company, does it mean I could be trained to understand how things are done? My mother got furious and shocked at the same time after I said that, because she had never seen me talk to her in that manner before. She threatened that she would never allow me to be part of the company. The lawyer, who was still around, made it clear to her that she had no right whatsoever to the companies again, as I am now the rightful owner of all the companies and that she had to obey every one of my instructions. I didn't say a word because everything made me remember my father again. It was like a reawakened wound. Before my father's lawyer left, I collected his contact and told him that I would call him afterwards. After he left, I confronted my mother, tagged her for wicked for consoling the truth, and played games to ensure I did not have to rightfully belong to her. Later, my mother became calm, knowing I had legal backup. Instead, she wanted to patronize me by letting her allowed to be continued to be managing the father's business. But I couldn't get over her foul play. So what'd I do? I refused and told her immediately to step down as acting CEO and managing director. Like most mothers would do, she told me to not forget what she was, my mother after all, and that she could disown me as her son if I refused to give the property to her, and just wait till her death before assuming ownership. The lawyer's visit has dissipated my fears, so I told her to go ahead, disown me because I still blamed her for my father's sudden death anyways, and loathed her for wanting to deny me access to his property. For, of course, her selfish interest. So, the following day, I called Mr. Barr, Andrew, to set up meetings with the company's management board to effect the new change in power. We had the board meeting, and none of the board members, including my mom's underlinings, could object after seeing the legal documents from Dad's lawyers. Well, since then, my mother would not see or talk to me and speak badly of me to everyone who knows, including my extended family. A few days later, I came back from the office with the pure intention of reconciling with Mom, only for me to get home and discover that my mother has moved out of the house without informing me. Well, since then, I didn't hear from her again because she blocked my number, and it's been a long time now. I was truly feeling bad for OP during this story. It just seemed like that mother was nothing but greedy. Guys, I want to know from you your perspective of this story. What do you think would have happened if OP would have gone a different route and maybe wasn't even part of the will? What do you think would have happened if the mother would have got most of the assets? Do you think that she would have helped out OP or no? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below, guys. We still have 2 more stories in today's video, and the story for the next one is this. Am I the a-hole for making homemade food for everyone except my brother's stepdaughter? Let me explain, though. She has a severe allergy, and I didn't want to be responsible for it. I'm 27 female, I'm not a professional chef, but I've taken a bunch of cooking classes and love making elaborate meals for friends and family. About 2 years ago, my brother Greg married Cheryl. Cheryl has a daughter from a previous relationship, Becca, she's 9, who has a severe health condition, including celiac and severe diary allergies that require her to carry an EpiPen everywhere she goes. Last weekend, I hosted a dinner at my house for my parents' wedding anniversary. I made a fancy 5-course dinner, and in addition to my parents, I invited 4 close friends of mine: Greg, Cheryl, Becca, and my sister. Her boyfriend and their 2 twins both ate. Because of Becca's food restrictions, I found a restaurant in town that specializes in gluten-free, dairy-free, as well as other allergen-free food, and arranged for them to make a full meal for Becca that I could just pick up in advance to the party. I've made a variety of specialty meals in the past, for example, keto meals when my friends were following that diet, and well, I liked the change. But knowing how serious Becca's restrictions were, I didn't trust myself to make her a meal. I don't know, I have ADHD and easily get distracted, and if I even used the wrong spoon or did not completely wash some flour off a bowl, it could make her incredibly sick. So, I thought the takeout solution would be fine, but when I served the food, I saw Cheryl looking at Becca's plate with a stony face. For her part, Becca started eating and seemed fine. Cheryl whispered to Greg, and Greg asked if he could talk to me in the kitchen. When we got there, he said that it was unbelievable that I could not be bothered to make something for Becca, and that they've been bragging about what a great cook I am to her, and that he knew I'd make keto, vegan, and other complicated kinds of food in the past. Now she would feel left out because she didn't get to eat what the rest of the family was eating. He said that it's so obvious that I did not care about making his stepdaughter feel like a part of the family, and that they're leaving. Greg, Cheryl, and Becca then left, with put a damper on the rest of the party. So, I felt like I did my best at the time, but in hindsight, I wonder if I should have tried harder to make Becca feel included, since she is a relatively new addition to our family. My question for you guys is, am I the a-hole? Alright guys, so the story right here, it had a top comment. This comment got a lot of attention, let's read it. For some reason, I read that and felt so sad for you. I'm honestly in disbelief you thought you did something wrong here. You were incredibly thoughtful in how you handled ensuring she had a meal suitable for her. You have ADHD and are well aware that mistakes are so easily made. So to ensure you did not seriously put this child's health in danger, you decided literally the safest option was to contact a restaurant to provide something she can eat. I cannot stress this enough. You were absolutely not the a-hole. Guys, to me, that comment just makes a lot of sense. It wasn't because OP was being lazy. She was just trying to be safe. Let me know your thoughts about it, and we'll turn our attention to the final story of the day, with the title being this: Am I the a-hole for telling my son he has to go to university, get a job, or get out of my house? My wife and I have 3 children. They're 17, 15, and 10. My oldest has no intention to do anything after high school, at least none that he's made it clear to us. So I gave him the same ultimatum my parents gave me. Either go to university, get a job, or get out. I chose to travel the world for 2 years. I had a lot of sailing experience, and my father had a lot of friends in that community, so I was able to sail around the world earning money and working my butt off. It was not a 2-year vacation. So, yeah, my family's well off, and I could have chosen an indolent life, but I knew I would be disappointed if I chose that. So, when I got back, I enrolled in university and eventually went to work for the family business. My wife thinks that I'm being pretty unfair to our poor baby boy, throwing him out into this tough world. I'm not. We have the money to pay for university. We have the money for all 3 kids. My middle child will probably end up with a good chunk of it in her pocket. She's on track for an academic as well as a golf scholarship. The 10-year-old is 10 and who knows what's going to do. But he knows the plan. We've not been secretive about the rule, we tell everybody. My wife and I agreed that we would raise productive members of society before we got engaged. Her and my son think I'm being cruel to expect him to fend for himself at 18, and I've offered him multiple opportunities to do stuff. He just says he has no interest in anything beyond his computer. I'm at a loss. I don't think I'm wrong for expecting an adult to an adult. My parents have already told him that they'll not be giving him any more money if he isn't in school or working. My wife's threatening to use her salary to support him, and I don't have any say in that. I won't actually kick him out of the house, but I'll stop paying his bills and cut off our grocery budget by 20%. If she wants to work so he doesn't have to, there's nothing I can do about it, really. Alright, so honestly, guys, in the comment section of this, it was not clean cut. There was people going back and forth saying the dad is actually an a-hole because a lot of kids are doing stuff online now, and if that's the path he wants to go, he should support him. But then you have the other side of people who say stuff like this. I'll read a couple comments. Not the a-hole. Assuming that a trade school, apprenticeship, or community college would also be acceptable. I just think that you should be very concerned about why a 17-year-old doesn't have plans or ambitions. But you're not the a-hole for having expectations that he either be in school or working. Yeah, guys, I have to agree with that last part of the comment. If he just doesn't want to do anything, doesn't have any goals or something, that could be alarming, and I do not blame OP at all for this. But let me know your thoughts about it, guys. Drop your comments down below. Let's talk about it. That's all the stories for today. If you don't know who I am, my name's Mr. Reddito. I narrate stories every single day. Come back tomorrow. I'll have another story for you guys. Have an amazing one, and I'll see you then.